Things I always like to do is get the audience connected to you. So, kind of your origin story. How did you get started? Where you're from? Uh, Tell us something that kind of connects us with who you are.
Sure. I'm 63 years old, born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1958. I was, um, I guess, from an origin story standpoint, I was an orphan until I was adopted at 2 years of age. My mother and father, my father was originally from Tyler, Texas. My mother was from Columbus, Mississippi. They built their first home. My father was a home builder and built our first home that I grew up in the year I was born. Um, he went to high school with a gentleman named Kimmons Wilson. Kimmons ended up founding Holiday Inns, an iconic brand, first brand in the hotel motel industry. My dad became one of the first franchisees of Holiday Inns, and he built a chain of them across the southeast. And it came time for college, and he told me to go to college and study what pleased me. And when I graduated, I'd come into the family business. So I went to college and studied philosophy and psychology because that's what I enjoyed. And my senior year, around December, he called me in my dorm room and told me he had great news. He'd sold the business and retired. That's my origin story.
As far as the textbooks first, mergers and acquisitions go, versus what really goes down out in the field and the brokerages and the investment bank, is there any big disconnects that needs to be, um, like, you know, the textbooks have it one way and it never goes that way?
Well, the thing about textbooks, and this applied when I was in wealth management, I believed that the efficient market hypothesis was largely true, as did Ben Graham, who wrote the Graham and Dodd textbook on value investing. At the end of his life, he said it doesn't work anymore because everybody does it. So you can't do it anymore. There's in the efficient market hypothesis, it says the market's too efficient for, individual investors to take advantage of misinformation, but it also assumes that all investors are rational. And therein lies the problem. And you have the same, I think, challenge when you take the textbook on mergers and acquisitions, buying businesses, selling businesses, and you apply it at a human level with people that have egos. I find that the textbook is a very good description of how businesses should be valued. Discounted cash flow, multiple of earnings, comparable business sales. And then I go to a business owner, had a conversation with one today. Every business like his that's sold over the last year is sold for an average or a median of 3.2 times owner's discretionary earnings. I have that conversation with him. He says, my business is worth 7 times earnings. Why? Because a friend of mine sold his business for 7 times earnings. And that's probably my biggest challenge, is trying to have a dialogue with the seller who comes to the table with a certain perception of their business and its value. Their baby's prettier than everyone else's baby. And their house is the best house, on the block. And to take it from an unemotional place and just say, well, maybe it is, and if it is, the market will respond that way, but here's where the market's going to price your business. And I think that may be the most challenging part of my role, is to reset expectations. And I think that the industry success rate speaks to the fact that brokers, and I'm not impugning the quality or integrity of brokers, but this is an industry stat, only about 30% of businesses that go to market with a broker sell. So 7 out of 10, the transaction doesn't go through. I think largely that's because of mispricing, unrealistic expectations over the price of the business.
In the state of Oklahoma, you don't even have to have a license to be a business broker, right? You
Right.
can buy a business card, write business broker on it, start passing it out, and you're a business broker. Now, some of the
Absolutely.
franchises have some decent training and stuff like that. I have friends that are business brokers, so I don't want to ruffle their feathers too much. But if your business broker is requiring 5, 10, 15, sometimes even $20,000 as a listing fee, I would really start looking at, and you're in that sub. If you're making less than $10 million a year and they're asking that as a listing fee, I would probably venture to say, be very careful. At least do your own math to figure out what the industry says your business is worth before you hear what a broker says your business is worth, right? So you probably have a better insight as a college professor teaching mergers and acquisitions than a lot of individuals I have on here. What do you say the current state of the market is for small to medium sized businesses? Um,
Yeah. So first and foremost, definitions. When I was in the wealth management business, we used to call people high net worth investors, and now there's high, there's ultra high, there's mass affluent. So for us, I think of small businesses as below a million in annual revenue, and obviously below a million in profits. That sort of 1 to 50 space is what we call micro private equity, and then 50 and up is lower middle market, up to middle market, up to and above. And so the space that's sort of below $1 million is more challenging than the space above it, simply because it's very difficult for those businesses to get bank financing. And so, what can we reasonably forecast the future to look like? That they're going to allocate an amount for the new owner's comp, and then what's left has to service debt. So they'll loan up to 90% of the purchase price of the business. It's historically been 80, but right now in the sort of COVID environment, they'll loan up to 90. But you got to pay the money back, and so there's a principal and interest payment due. And they want to see at least a 1.5 to 1 debt coverage ratio on the cash flow that they model to be left. And they're not looking in the windshield as much as they're looking in the rearview mirror. So one of the other challenges we have is owners coming out of COVID, their business is starting to perform really well. And so what they see happening for the last 90 days is really exciting. But the SBA and the banks are going to work off last year's tax returns, right? So again, financing happens more in the rear view mirror.
Out of these new buyers, one of the big concerns I had, and I wanted to ask you today, is when you get a bunch of new people doing something and they really don't have the skills, or even potentially, I mean, there's people doing these courses that have never run a business, but they're now out there going to go buy them.
Yeah.
One of my biggest fears is anytime you get that going on, it happens in real estate, happens in other stuff. You get a lot of new, inexperienced people that are hurting the business owners, hurting the market. Then legislation comes in and they try to legislate the problem away. Um, do you see any, like in your brokerage and your investment banker realm? Do you see any, signs that you're getting a lot of people that are very inexperienced thinking they're going to buy businesses?
Sure. We get a lot of inbound calls from people looking for businesses. Some percentage of that is legitimate. As you well know, being here in Texas, we have an enormous population transfer, particularly from California to Texas. They're coming from a highly regulated state government to a less regulated state government. And I get a lot of calls from Californians that are relocating here that are looking to buy businesses who have mixed levels of sophistication. Um, I'm always kind of surprised at the relative sophistication of buyers that I even assume are sophisticated.
But the problem is I would look around the room and see 60, 70, 80, sometimes 100, 150 people in the room. And if you'd ask everybody who's bought a house this year, just a few hands would pop up. Like then you say who's ever bought a house,
Right.
right? But if you ask, if just a few hands pop up, and then you ask who's put up an offer on a house this year, and like 50, 60 people, half of the room would raise their hand. Well, they're making offers on houses they have no ability, no knowledge, no nothing to buy.
Right.
And it turns out they're doing what's called wholesaling, which is a legitimate strategy. But inside of that, what happened was Oklahoma State passed a law this year. Actually, as of November, you have to have a license, a broker's or a real estate license, in order to wholesale real estate.
I'm not a
So
fan of overreaching government regulation, and I've been a small business owner. I've bought and sold, I've started, built, as per the introduction, and I know how hard it is to sit in that seat and meet payroll. And I was in heavily regulated businesses. I ran a Securities and Exchange Commission regulated investment advisory firm. So the SEC would show up on my doorstep and knock, and an auditor would come in and live in my office for a week. I was chairman of a bank, and we were regulated by both the state banking commissioner and the Federal Reserve. So I've lived in a highly regulated environment. I'm not here to debate the merits of that, but what I would say is you're right. When I think there was a scream and cry for regulation of the trading apps and for everything surrounding the speculative frenzy of the short squeeze around GameStop and the other things. And you could pass regulations, but people are going to act in irrational exuberance, as our previous Treasury Secretary called it. And I don't know how you can regulate every law to keep people from acting in an irrational way.
What do you see as a way to get the word out to those business owners that there is this secondary market for people who want to be part of what they built?
That's a good question. First and foremost, I agree with you. The demographics are factual and objective. There is a very large population of people who are at retirement age who own and operate businesses without a logical succession plan, and so they're either going to sell their business or they're going to close it. And So that's a given. And I expect over the next couple of years, the next several years, the next decade probably, we're going to see that trend continue to develop, and we're going to see more and more businesses coming to market. And it creates a great opportunity for people that have the skills and the humility, and the energy to step in and take over that business and operate it. If you're going to go pick somebody to invest your assets, you would probably want to go talk to two or three and try to get some understanding of, what is your process, and how much do I pay you? Are there any hidden fees? What can I expect? How long will this take? Who are my buyers? How do you find them? And I find that people don't really ask a lot of great questions, which means they don't know the questions to ask. And
I'd add
so
I'd
they
add a
fall
question
back
on
on how much is my business worth, and then the person that tells them it's worth the most gets the business.